Thank you everyone for joining this webinar. The idea of this webinar is to give an overview of how and the HL7 FHIR is using GATEKEEPER. Just to introduce a little bit myself, I'm involved different level in HL7 Italy, Europe, and international. And I'm also the co-facilitator of the HL7 International Patient Summary Project. Some of the slides that are in this presentation are kept from, derived and modified from the educational material of HL7. So what is the scope? The scope is, as I told, to describe how the HL7 FHIR can be used for standardizing conventional and no-conventional data in the scope of GATEKEEPER. It's not the intent of today to make a course on FHIR, but obviously if you would like to have more detail, I'm happy and open to provide the information that are needed. Where FHIR comes in GATEKEEPER, you know that there are two aspects to consider. One is that there are some interfaces, some API that are supposed to use the FHIR API to exchange, to share some health and health-related data. And on the other side, the information model of FHIR is supposed to be used as a reference information model for such a kind of data, for the sharing of data, of health data. So what I will try to give is to give an overview, very short overview of FHIR without entering into detail, and then to move describing why it's important also for the scope of GATEKEEPER, profiling FHIR, what does it mean and why, and how this is used for creating the GATEKEEPER FHIR IG, the implementation guide. So for the few people that do not know what is FHIR, FHIR is a standard, is, let's say, now the most important standard for HL7, and is conceived to, designed to exchange, facilitate the exchange of care information by using the most recent technologies, but it obviously is not limited to that. The idea of FHIR is to work on a set of base building blocks that are called resource. Everything in FHIR is a resource. And the intent of this resource is that of not trying to define everything, but to include some core information that satisfy the majority of the common use case. Some example of resources that exist in FHIR are the patient, the observation. As I told, the resources are the small logical unit of exchange with a well-defined behavior and precisely identified. As I told, everything in FHIR is a resource, and this resource, this building block, are supposed to be used to create, to describe the different kind of information that you need to. So if you need to create a lab report or a diagnostic or a hospital summary report, you can use all these building blocks, the patient, the practitioner role, the observation, the condition, medication related resource, and combine them to create your summary, your report, and so on. The standard is open, it's accessible in the HL7.org site. And if you go to that link, you can find a page where are listed and classify more than 100 different resources. These resources, when you go there, you have a, let's say, an abstract logical description of the content and the this content in the release 4 of FHIR, that is the currently published version, may be implemented by using an XML representation or a JSON representation or a turtle representation. It's likely that the next version that will be published will include, for example, also a JSON LD 1.1 version that likely will substitute the turtle template representation. So, what is the idea? The idea is, as I told, this resource provides some interface for interacting. The idea is to use the REST approach, so you have some atomic interaction that you can realize with this resource. You can create them, you can query and get them, you can use and update as needed. The idea, as I told before, is that you can have bundle a composition of this kind of resource. You can send to a server and then retrieve them atomically. So you can, for example, send a diagnostic report that refers to other observation resource, and then you can query only specific kind of observation resource depending on what is your need. As I told, the resource can be accessed by some basic REST, so create, read, update, delete, but they are not only the only one that are existing for accessing a FHIR resource, but these are the basic one. So you can create, you can update, you can read it or query them. So let's move to the second part. So is why profiling FHIR? So FHIR provides a baseline. There are several people, maybe implementer, that think that they prefer just to implement FHIR. And this is, depending also on the context of use, is not so uncommon because the resources already are quite discrete. You can always agree implicitly on how to use the resources. And so there are a lot of situations in which FHIR is, let's say, is just implemented. But even when the situation is more complex, and in general, I would say, it's important to better formalize how these resources should be used for a specific scope. And this is technically called profiling a resource. So profiling means to define a set of conformance rules to be applied to this resource. The reason for that is, I think, quite evident. I show you that there are more than 140 resources. Doesn't mean that all the actors that would like to use FHIR need to use all of them. I tell you an example, who is very few use substance polymer or medication product or ingredient for the registration of medication. So there are some resources that are very specific to specific contexts. As described, a resource do not try to cover everything, but it may have information that are not of interest for your use case. So you may want, for example, to say, okay, if I'm using allergy, I don't care about reaction. And so please focus on the main allergy information. The base resource usually have a lot of elements that are optional, and also you may have different choice of data type. There are terminologies that are constrained. So defining all these constraints that better describe how to use the resource is called profiling. This for the content. Then we have operation. These are the list of operation that you can act, the kind of interaction you can have with the resource. And then there is also operations that are valid for all the resources, and other that are defined specifically for a different kind of resource. For example, the patient resource has an operation that is everything that is supposed to be used to get all the information that are related to that patient. So when you implement, you are not expected that you are able to support all this kind of operation, all this kind of interaction. And also, for example, if I'm use a GET, so if I'm realizing a search using the GET operation, sorry, the GET, I may have a lot of different parameters that I can use to query, and that I combine them. It's unlikely that a server support all these possible combinations. So it's important to describe exactly how a specific implementation, a specific environment, a specific data space, what are the rules that need to be applied, what are the constraints that need to be applied to the base standard. This slide summarizes a little bit some of the things that already I said. We have a different type of context, and for representing the same information, there is a single set of resources. And so you need to adapt what is the characteristic of that resource in your context of use. You need to define what are the resources, the elements that are used, what are the features of the API that are used in that context, the terminologies, or how you would like to map, for example, your local requirement to the specific implementation. In terms of, this is an example of where a profile in the level of information may intervene. You may want, for example, to say, yes, I have an identifier, but in my context, I want that you use at least such a kind of identifier, and this is the right way to represent them. Or you want to limit the number of the possible repetition of name to 1, and add some binding for the vocabulary. But the thing that is usually done when profiling is to define extension in order to cover information that are not in this core set of elements. Why this is needed? It is needed because it's clear that this generic block, if you try to combine them, is in most cases is unlikely that exactly as it is being designed fit for your purpose. That's the reason why FHIR standard conceived the idea of constraining, means to adapting the resource to specific use, and to extend, so defining a way to add new thing, or new thing maybe a new element, maybe a new data type. Also, you can also include a block of information, and you can use these constraint resource plus extension to achieve your goal. When you have defined that, and these are specified in a set of conformance resources that will be listed later, when you do that, then you can publish this resource. You can, so that server and client can get them and check that the different implementation conform with that profile. You can validate your instances. You can use them to generate human readable guide via spec-like, so like a website, and I will show you what I mean, and other things. The idea of profiling is that of using a layered approach, means that you may have imagine that you have the core standard, and then you can define some core or base profile that apply to a large set of, sorry, to a set of instances, and with some constraint, but not too much, in order to be applicable for different contexts, maybe just focusing the scope of the resource. And then you can define your national, or you can define for, let's say, for jurisdiction or for scope, your profile, and build on top of them. One example of universal implementation guide that include, for example, some reusable profile is the International Patient Summary that define a core set, a minimum set of information for specific data like allergy, problem, medication, vaccination, result, procedure, and so on. Let's try to be more precise on what is the approach for FHIR for representing things, and how we can use the profiling to achieve our scope. Let's start for the observation resource. The observation resource is a very quite generic resource that could be used for representing a lot of different things. Could be used for vital sign, could be used for a clinical assessment, for finding, for device measurement, and so on. Supposing that you need to describe the body temperature. What exists in the has been developed at the level of HL7 International is a profile that describes how the observation can be used for specifying vital sign. On top of that, at a universal level, so that could be applied everywhere, there is a body temperature profile that, by using the constraints that are defined for the vital sign, define how to describe the body temperature. What we can do is, supposing that we have additional requirement, or we would like to apply further constraint to represent the body temperature, we can reuse that profile and develop our profile that describe how the body temperature can be represented. This is an optimal cases. There are other cases in which the gatekeeper profile will be directly derived from the base resource, because there are no suitable profile that fit for our purpose, but we need to decide case by case. I mentioned the conformal resources. There are a lot of different kind of. For the time being, where we focus on are sorry, the content resource. Forget about the specific name. It's called structured definition, but what is important is that give you the possibility to define what are the constraints that you could apply to an information model for that describe a resource. Then there are consistent value set resources that they say, okay, these are the type of terminology, these are the type of value set that I will use in my context. You may have concept map that allow to map different value sets. Then we have an implementation guide that can be used to collect all this information together for a specific scope. I highlighted also the capability statement that refer and use other conformal resources like operation search parameter that describe how a client or a server should behave and what are the type of API, how the API should behave for a specific implementation. I mentioned already that the implementation guide is a sort of collector of all these conformance resources for a specific purpose. And this is what we are trying to do with the Gatekeeper implementation guide. So what it is, this Gatekeeper implementation guide? It is a set of rules around the FHIR resources. Mainly for the time being, these resources are for the information part that describe how the resource can be used to exchange information about, for example, wearable, medication tracker, or other information within the Gatekeeper platform with the purpose of enabling the certification of this information by the Gatekeeper Trust Authority. The FHIR IG has a human-readable browsable part and also include a set of formal computable resources that I mentioned before that could be used for validating the instances or for validating requests against a specific API. The possible content of our IG will contain, for example, measurement, may contain information about allergy, or may contain information about medication. And the intent is to develop these by reusing as possible existing implementation guide. I mentioned the IPS, I mentioned the observation vital sign, but there are other that we can try to reuse. The current IG is, for the time being, temporarily available at that site. Let me show you. So if you go, you can link there. You can see that there are already a set of resources that has been developed that need to be further analyzed. But we will come back later to that guide. Sorry, let me try to move back to the, yes, okay, to the presentation. So, how we are going to build this IG for supporting the Gatekeeper health space? The idea is to follow an iterative incremental process. That means try to get the information that are available, try to formalize them, and by involving the people, so with a co-creation approach, try to proceed with a continued normalization and adding progressively new type of data to the guide. We need to consider, let's say, 3 levels. So obviously we need to decide, and this is what has been done already, what are the kind of information that are needed, what is called sometimes the conceptual level or the business level. Would be useful to provide a better formalization in a implementation independent way of that of this information. Sometimes they are called logical model, and then we need to arrive to specify how to use FHIR, how to implement practically this information for sharing them. So let's focus on the last 2 parts that are what is supposed to go in the FHIR IG. So the intent, as possible, is to formalize this data in an implementation independent model by using FHIR logical model, and then to have FHIR profiles, so that say in concrete how to use FHIR as well in that model. This is a kind of example, so consider that we start from some information that are collected at the pilot level and try to represent them in a normalized way. And this is an example of FHIR logical model, and use that for profiling the actual resource. What I would like to highlight, if you go to reading the FHIR IG, is please be careful on the difference between the snapshot and the differential view. The snapshot view describes only what is changed from the base resource, and sometimes could be misleading. Let me show you, for example, what is happening in our IG. If I'm able to find, sorry. Okay, so supposing that I go to see how the blood pressure could be represented. So this is the Gatekeeper blood pressure, the current version of the Gatekeeper blood pressure profile. If you go to the differential, that is the typical view that you see, oh, I have only one element for describing the observation. This is because this profile is built on top of another profile, the observation BP. So if you click there, you can see that the information that are actually included are much more. Obviously, also this one is, for example, is a differential from another resource that is the observation vital sign that I mentioned before, that provide other constraints. What if you want to have, in a single view, all these constraints applied to the base resource? So instead of looking to the differential view that only highlight the differences, what you can do is to go to the snapshot table. And this is all the constraint that has been defined to all the layers of the profile applied to the resource. So, but obviously these include all the possible information, and this is less readable. You see, it's very long and so on. That's the reason why is usually people go and look to the differential. What is important is to understand that if it is derived from other, you need to go there and to see all the constraints that has been applied at the different layer. Yeah. So let's try to see how we could represent some of the information that we have. Some of the information that are listed are, for example, a vital sign or generic measurement. And this is one list taken from one of the documents. All of them are usually represented by using an observation that allow you to provide a lot of detail about this measurement. The example that I showed you before about the blood pressure, that is one of the possible data that we would like to exchange. As I told, what has been done also in this case has been defined a blood pressure logical model that just highlight what are the information that we may expect to find. Obviously, this model need to be kept updated based on what are the actual feedback of the pilot. And based on that, we can then specify how to profile the FHIR resource. And this is the example that I showed you before, showing how you can you need to refer to other profile in order to have a precise view on how to use that observation. The point is that, as I told, observation is a very generic thing, so will be used for lab and other kind of result, will be used for lifestyle factor, and will be used for a lot of other kind of information that we are going to exchange. What is important for profiling these resources is to obviously to work on the terminology, because obviously we need to have a set of code or a code that define how to identify that specific observation for representing that specific lab test or lifestyle factor and so on. So this is an activity that is ongoing, but need to be reflected then in the work on the IG. Some work has been started, just to show you. If you go to the implementation guide, you can find already a set of different value set. It is a first draft, just to start the work. For example, some value set that represent the value set that has been, for the time being, indicated by some pilot. There are value set that could, for example, lab vital sign, that are those, the vital sign gatekeeper, that describe the list of code that are expected to be used for representing this information. And what we can do also is to define some concept map that formalize the way, for example, in which code from the represented from the Greek pilot maps into the common part. And this resource can be used for be important, be in a terminology server that is able to read this file, this concept map resource. So obviously, not only measurement. One other important resource is the condition. The condition allows you to describe, for example, a problem, a situation, a condition of the patient. It allowed to define what is the clinical status, if it is unconfirmed, refused, or confirmed, differential. It provides a way to say what is the kind of condition that you are referring to, a code that describes exactly, for example, I'm talking about hypertension, I'm talking about diabetes or other things, and a lot of other data that describe that context. Obviously, also in this case, we need to understand exactly what are the details that we would like exchange in our space and profile that resource consequently. Sometimes there is, usually when I arrive here, there are some questions about why you are using a condition, why you are using an observation, but I haven't seen any specific and raising on that point. Maybe we can skip that part, maybe too detailed. We can come back if you have specific question on that. Another information might be, for example, an allergy. In that case, there are a specific resource that is a sort of, is like the condition, but is not the condition. And this is the allergy intolerance. Also, in this case, you can say what is the verification status, the clinical status of the kind of allergy, and the agent that provide that trigger that allergy. And you may also record possible reactions that are connected to that propensity to adverse reaction. There are resources that are used for describing medication information. For example, you can use the medication administration to record, to inform if a pill has been taken or not. And you can say, okay, that has been taken, no, that has not been taken, and why has not been taken, which kind of product has been administered, and other information. Can be provided very detailed information. In other cases, you may want to profile that resource just to provide few of them. And there are much more. There are information like the care plan, service requests, medication requests, nutrition requests that are maybe used to describe what you need to do. Or there are cases in which you want to collect through questionnaire some data. So you can define a questionnaire that is a definition resource that say, okay, these are the kind, for example, these are the kind of questions that I would like to do. And then for each questionnaire that is being answered, you can have an instance of a question response that can be used to generate other specific resource that concur to the definition of the information for that patient. So you can record the question and response and then use that for filling the information about that subject. I mentioned a few of them. As I told, there are more than 100. So following the approach that I described, the intent is to proceed and increase progressively the information that are profiled in the Gatekeeper implementation guide. In the last 5 minutes, let me just to give an overview for those that might be interested in on how this IG is built. All the, let's say, the conformance resources are recorded, are stored into a project GitHub repository. There are FHIR profile, terminology resource, logical model, and other kind of input that can be used for specifying profile. We have an IG template that defines the look and feel, and we can also provide some textual page to help the human comprehension. So anyone can contribute to them. So please let me know. I'll be really happy to have input on your side. All of them then can be retrieved by some tool. There is the FHIR IG publisher. It's not a build, sorry, it's not a builder, but it's publisher. But and this generated package, that is what I showed you before, that has the human readable part and the package with the actual resource that can be used and retrieved from a FHIR server to validate, for example, the requests that the instances that you receive. Usually, when it arrives at a certain level of maturity, a FHIR IG can be registered so that anyone can query and search for IG and resources, and the human readable part is published for human access. And this package can be used as a tool for validating, and there is a standard Java validator that is published and accessible, downloadable, can be downloaded from the FHIR IG specs, but obviously other validator can be developed and exist. For people that is interested in, this is the link for the GitHub. It is for the time being a private Gatekeeper GitHub area. So let me know if you want to be added. Happy to have people that can contribute. And this is the link to the FHIR for the current version of the FHIR IG. And this is what I show you before. So just to come back to that part, for the time being is very, very simple. There is only one short home page and a list of logical model, for example, for the patient representation, the blood pressure, and the corresponding FHIR resources, how to represent sleep duration, oxygen saturation, generic vital sign in Gatekeeper, patient, body temperature, blood glucose. It's likely that for some lab result will not be reasonable to define so specific profile. It might be useful maybe to define a Gatekeeper lab result, but this is a design choice that we can decide during the way. And there are already, as I mentioned, some value set that has been loaded. Obviously, these are very, very early draft, just to as a proof of concept to show what can be done with the FHIR IG and the concept map. So as I told, it would be useful to integrate that with also example from the pilot, so that they can be automatically validated against the profile that are defined with the, so we can validate the instances, but it could be also useful for validating the profile. So also in that case, if you have example that could be shared, please share them. And also, as I told, the part of text of description is quite limited for the time being. So if you have contribution, idea for heading page can be structured, is a website, so can be structured. Please let me know, give me input, give me contribution, and I will put into the package in order to improve the readability of that IG.